going?
You are live.
I am live. I am live. What's going on, guys? How is everyone? Thank you guys for showing up. For those of you who did, I know it's beautiful out. It's not a good reason to want to be indoors right now, but thank you guys for attending. I'm Kevin Ornelas. I'm a filmmaker and photographer. I work with Sony. I'm part of the Sony collective. I've been a professional filmmaker and photographer for about 8.5 years, 9 years now. And thank you guys for coming. I'm here to showcase some of my work today that I did using the Atomos monitor and recorder to kind of help me along the way of some of the work I've been doing and to just filmmaking in general and how it's been able to help me. So basically, I don't know what cameras everyone shoots with. I shoot with a Sony A7S.
I can barely hear you.
You can barely hear me?
Yeah.
Good. So today, basically, the premise I want to do today is to help filmmakers and how the Atomos monitor can actually help get the most out of your camera. Most cameras now already record at 4K, and they have a lot of logs and different codecs, but it's still very limited within the processing power of the actual camera, which is why it's very important to have an external recorder, which allows you to get true 422 color codec, and to properly expose your images and to like really push your creativity and your stylized images a lot further. So to get started.
They help you also with the judging the footage because that little screen that the Sony has no help. So having a big monitor.
Yeah, absolutely. So having the smaller monitor on your actual camera, you're absolutely right that you are limited to what you can and can't see. It's really hard to really know whether or not when you're shooting in a log. Right. It's really hard to know whether or not your exposure is spot on because you are limited to what the camera has to offer, whereas this is full HD across the board, and you can actually do a preview of your LUT and log while recording. I should probably turn this way. So I'm going to start basically with my setup for how I use my camera. Wrap around this way. Got it. So go into my settings, and to give you guys a full preview of what I'm doing. So this is what I'm seeing, and can you see this on the camera? Perfect. So on my initial settings for my camera to start utilizing the actual Atomos monitor, I set my video frame rates to 4K, which is normally what I do a lot of my more professional and production films. I do at 4K. I do 30 frames per second at 100 megabytes, which is the top speed for it, and then from here on my monitor, make sure my S-Log is on. Hold on. S-Log 3, Gamma 3 Cine, and now I'm kind of set up to record. Now from the actual monitor, you have your wave format. I'll pull up a little bit bigger, and I'll make the brightness a little higher.
So what profile you say you?
So I shoot S-Log 3. S-Log 3, and then...
9, the profile 9 on the camera?
Well, you can set your custom profiles. I have my profiles set to the ones I use primarily at the very top. It just makes it easier when scrolling through. So if you have that set up, then from your S-Log, from your codec, all right, I go to color mode, and I put my color mode onto Gamma 3 Cine. You got it? Gamut 3 Cine. And then from that point, now I don't know if you're also aware, if this is your first time shooting with S-Log3, it's really helpful to overexpose by 1.5 to 2 stops, depending on what you're shooting at the moment and your location and multiple variables of that. But it definitely helps with reducing some of the noise within the shadows. And then the monitor is really going to like help you key in on that.
Lens, right?
I'm sorry?
Depends the lens that you're using.
I mean, it's very, it varies based upon the lens, whether or not you have an ND filter, a polarizer, any of that can alter your exposure. But it's very important to keep in mind you have to overexpose because you are going to get noise, especially if you're recording from the internal camera. But it's really beneficial when you actually connect it to the Atomos monitor, because the Atomos monitor will actually help you dial it in as far as like having like the perfect exposure. So here's my waveform. I guess this is a bad example of what we're looking at in the camera. But as you can see, whatever I move within it, it kind of shows you the exact image. So from left to right, it's your exact image of what the sensor is seeing. And that's how it reads whether or not the color's coming into frame. So like right now, I'm pretty solid. The exposure's not that bad right now. You want to keep your highlights at around 100 if possible. And basically this is the REI spectrum, which is basically, it's the spectrum from black to white. So this lets you know whether or not your whites are at 100 and your blacks are at 0. So everything within here you want to keep in that frame, so that way it's broadcast friendly and it keeps you from overexposing and underexposing. So with that setup, we have this. Take this off screen. Drop it in the corner. Now, here's one of the cooler settings. So when you go into the yellow menu button on the bottom right, from here you can set your Sony camera settings. So if you're shooting with Sony, put your Sony settings on, your S-Log from what your picture profile, from what you're shooting.
It's not showing the picture.
You want to hang out till after, and then we can.
Huh?
Yeah.
You want to hang out till after?
Yeah, we could do a Q&A a little bit after. From here, you set your S-Log, your color gamut. So here we're shooting at gamut 3, and then from here you can adjust your HDR settings, so you can kind of see the proper exposure, and it also gives you the actual colors. So it's not completely flat; it gives you a basic idea of what your final image is going to be like. Now, a lot of people probably would say, what's the difference from recording internally from the camera to the actual external monitor? And the camera itself is very limited in a way where it has unbelievable power. It can shoot 4K, it has unbelievable features, but it's limited by the processing power within the actual camera. What the monitor actually does, it allows you to record everything out of the actual camera. Let me rephrase this. You can record everything from the camera that outputs everything at a higher bit rate than it can actually record internally, because it's limited. So what you record in 4K video at, let's say, S-Log on my current settings, you would get a 420 color bit rate, which is still great, but you're limited because when you record here, you'll get a full 422 color bit rate, which just allows you for more latitude in post-processing, as far as you'll get better colors, better shades of the colors, a little bit less noise, and it just helps you really dive in deep when you're in post-processing and trying to color or stylize your final video. And this kind of gives you that. Another huge advantage of that is being able to record in ProRes, or if you're a Adobe user and a Premiere user, you record in your native HQX Avid codec. Basically what that means is when you go into processing and you're starting to edit your video, having the files already rendered into the codec to edit saves a lot of rendering time and a lot of headaches when you're just like editing. When you edit from the Sony camera directly, it comes as an MP4 file. And when you import that into your timeline, a lot of the times your computer is running in the background, rendering those files to fit the timeline for 422, depending on what you're cutting at that moment. So basically, it streamlines things a lot easier, and you're able to actually get the full features and utilize the full power of your camera when recording video onto the external monitor. So that's really helpful, and it's really helped me along the way. I brought some clips here to kind of showcase me shooting with and without the monitor, and showcasing how much of an advantage I've had shooting with it and how it's really helped me get the proper exposures when shooting my S-Log, and making sure that my color grading is on point. So if we go over here, this was from this past last week during Fashion Week. As you can see in this clip, it's really noisy. I was shooting an S-Log, and I was shooting without the external monitor. And the lighting conditions weren't great. It was pretty much set up like a studio shoot, so it was very like harsh lighting and then very dark around the edges. I overexposed shooting internally from my monitor. Everything looked pretty spot on. And then when I brought it into post, this is pretty much what I saw, which is a lot of noise, very grainy, almost unusable footage. So within that process, I had to go through a lot of post-processing, and even then I couldn't even save the image. And that's been shooting with log video and not having...
S3.
That's S-Log 3, correct.
From the camera, I'm sorry, here, or from the monitor?
No, this is footage filmed directly internally from the camera. And then as you can see from the post-processing, it's really hard to save that kind of image if it's not properly exposed, if you don't have the proper tools to see the image in which you're filming. And then here you can kind of just see like the gradient of how the post-processing works, but it's still unusable. I ended up just cutting that footage completely out and having to reshoot. So during that time, when I was backstage, I ended up setting up the whole rig and the whole monitor, and I had the monitor set up for these shots. And what I got was a lot cleaner images, better exposure rates. Having the waveform there really helped, and you can just see from the color grading from that one image, it's a huge difference from the shadows to the blacks. It gives you a lot more latitude when dealing. If you're a photographer moving into video, it's as if you're trying to edit a JPEG from a RAW file. It's that drastic of a difference. It seems very subtle to the average eye, but when you're the one creating it, and if this is something that's yours, it gives you so much more latitude to what you can do. And you take full advantage of the dynamic range that the Sony camera has to offer, or whatever camera that you're shooting with at the moment.
That was at 60 frames?
This was all shot at 60 frames. I'm using a Sony a7R III. It is currently my favorite camera to film with. I used to use the a7S II, but since the release of the R3, it's really taken over.
You like it better?
I would say the features of it, they've really improved the log video formats. So S-Log 3 on, for instance, the a7S II was at a bare minimum of 1600 ISO that you would have to film at. Now, if you're shooting outside, that's really harsh conditions. It makes it really difficult to get proper exposure. More of a reason to actually have an Atomos field recorder, because if I had it in that situation, I probably would have gotten a lot better footage. But the a7R III, with the new release of it, they actually made the S-Log at ISO 800. So it's a huge difference when filming. Totally. This is just the same clip going over, and that's just the post-processing of it. So with that said, that's pretty much how I kind of set up my camera. If there's any questions as far as like setting up the camera before I move on to some of the features and what I really love most about the monitor and how it's really helped me, because it's more than just a recorder for the video. It's actually could also be used as a recording device. So if you have an external microphone, you can actually plug it directly in here, and you'll get far better sound than you would recording internally through the camera. So there's multiple things that are really helpful. Questions? Anything online? Good? What's going on? All right.
Did I miss anything important?
I guess you could wait. You can wait to find out. So back here, to showcase, these are some of the more footage that I shot to kind of give you a better example of, stop this, let's pick a video file that I shot. This is this little documentary I'm working on with a fashion blogger, and we recorded a couple of days ago. Let's see the playback. So one of the really cool things about the playback on this actually is being able to actually control the speed in which it plays back, which I find very helpful when trying to skim through an image and trying to lock it in, and being able to actually flag what image you actually like so you actually know when to go back to it. There we go. Hold on. Reset this. And to show you how I use the Atomos monitor to kind of get the proper exposure, this right now has all the LUTs and HDR actually on. And if I take this all off and I return it back to the log video, this is the actual image and how, log. And this was actually how it looked in my camera, directly from the camera. So if I was filming directly to the camera to get the exposure the way I wanted it, it would almost look like this.
ProRes or DNX?
I'm sorry?
Are you shooting ProRes?
I'm shooting ProRes. Everything's set up exactly for my workflow. So I use Final Cut as my prime editing suite. And
This question based on that. Those two formats, what's the difference?
I'm sorry?
ProRes and the other.
ProRes and the Avid.
Yeah.
Avid is
What's the
for
difference?
Adobe.
There's different or it's just the same?
It's really just designed for the editing software in which you're using, and it just makes it a lot more straight line. Yeah, and it goes right in without. Yeah, so it saves you some post processing. So when I throw on the HDR, make sure my S-log's on and my gamut space is on set properly. This is what my final image actually ends up looking like, as opposed to it being very white and washed. So while I'm filming, I'm actually able to know what my color is going to be, what my color grading is going to look like, and it just gives me a better idea, especially if you're dealing with a client on set, or if there's anything like that, or if you're second guessing a certain shot. This really helps you dial it in and get the image the way you need it to be right. And it just helps a lot with color grading. So I can get all technical with that, but I'll show you a couple of images that I've been working with Denny. So this is a basic rough cut, and this is all shot directly recorded to the Atomos Ninja Flame.
My name is Denny Balmaceda, age 30, from Jersey City. I'm a blogger slash influencer, even though I hate that word, but I guess that's who I am now. And yeah, just living life to the fullest. I'm also a Cancer, if that helps. Which is the best sign, I think.
Yeah, if you're insecure.
I'm not insecure though. Is that what Cancers are? Says who?
So that's like a small snippet of something I filmed recently with it. And if I show you how these images looked prior to the color grading, so now seeing it from the monitor, then seeing it actually here in post, If I remove all the effects, that's how the image is recorded. It's very flat, very washed. And if you pull up your colors, you can kind of see like where your highlights are. This obviously was probably overexposed by about a half a stop. But because I was able to actually record in ProRes in full 422 color bit, I was actually able to have a lot more latitude to be able to save the images. So even if you make a small subtle mistake, because you're shooting outside, exposures change, you could turn a corner and it's a lot brighter. So these are just like small subtleties that you may run into, and this really gives you the latitude to be able to save that and be able to have as many images usable as possible when filming. And then if I throw it back on, like, that's the color rate I got. I was going for more cinematic kind of tones, and having the ability to like really dig deep and to create your own like stylized images and to create a film that really speaks to you and is able to represent what you're the story that you're trying to tell is extremely helpful. And yeah, so with that said, if there is any questions, I am open to a couple. I'm happy to go a little bit more in depth with the settings in which I use and why.
You need more hard drive space when it comes from this footage different than this one from the camera. You need more space in the hard drive. It's a bigger file, right?
The file's only, it's not necessarily a bigger file. It really depends on whether or not you're recording at 4K or 1080p. All that really varies. What this does give you though is a true codec and like almost the rawest image you can have for video, where you're able to have the most dynamic range. Because unlike photos, like it's a lot harder to manipulate video. So like when you're shooting video, it's really important that you have to have proper exposure. Like all your shots have to be spot on. There's, I mean, this could be paired with any camera, and it's unbelievably useful. Yeah, so it has S-Logs for all of them, like ARRI. This is one of the best field models. If you're a documentary or a filmmaker or anyone that's looking to really break through into the commercial space or just creating awesome stories, and you just need to have a step up above than everybody else, having an external recorder is extremely helpful. Having a monitor to actually be able to see what you're filming is extremely helpful. Being able to actually see your focusing, your zebra, whether or not you're exposed or not. I don't have a gray card with me. Otherwise, I would have probably shown a little thing of how I actually expose properly within this actual space. Sure. All right, just waiting on Seth here. So the focus peaking, which is a huge thing, which I really actually utilize. It's really helpful, especially if you're running on a rig or on a gimbal, to really see what you're locked in on. It's extremely helpful. You can obviously adjust the colors to make it stand out more based upon the image. Oh, amazing. Thanks. Thanks, Seth.
You got it.
All right. Let's see if I actually set this up. So the focus peaking is like a huge thing for me. You're able to actually zoom in, which is really cool, directly from here, and you can kind of just drag and pull to see where your focus is, what comes out of focus, and it just allows you to kind of like really dial in each image that you're trying to capture. And we're out. So we'll leave it there. So now that I got this gray card, one of the things I do, if I have time to set it up based upon when I'm shooting, if I'm shooting an interview for a film, I normally go through, I use the Zebra, and what that does is it really allows me to lock in the exposures. I'm recording here. There we go. Can you see this? It's really gonna be tough. Here, we'll try. I mean, it's gonna be hard to do this with two hands, but can make it work. I can make this work. We can make this work. Hey, that works. Perfect. Nope. Nope, fail. We got an epic fail here. All right. Well, for those of you who don't know, let me just explain while we try to figure to get this set up. Using the gray card. That's cool. Using the gray card really helps you with your histogram and using zebra. So on your histogram, let's make this a little bit bigger. Normally your grays would be around 40. This gray color right here would be about like the 40% IRE. So basically from here, okay. Good. So from here I can control from the inside camera settings. And then we start setting up my ISO, set my shutter. Now, this right here should be around 20, and this right here is about 80, and then this is 40. So if you look at your actual scale here on the side, you can kind of see where your midtones, your highlights, and your shadows are at. And if you utilize this, if you could keep it within the space, you set the settings. You can see the noise start to kick in. So once you set it to the highlights where you want them, you make sure it's in frame. So you're kind of overexposed. Lower that down. And my midtone should be about here. Can you see me? I'm sorry about that. Try to keep it wide. And once I get the exposure, you should be relatively good to go. It's really noisy right now from looking from you guys. So with the gray card, once you have that exposure, pretty sure I had it set, but now that wasn't my actual image, so it looks a little off now. But once you have that exposure set and from your gray card, where am I going? Stalling out here. Yeah, 200 is the lowest. 100 is the lowest on zebra. Let's take this off. Sorry. Let's try this one more time. Because it's supposed to be on the zebra. I just realized it was off. It's fine. We're good. Here we go. This is why I was a little confused at first. Sorry about that, guys. So the zebra, once you have the zebra, I have it set to the brightness down, transparency. So the threshold. So the lowest threshold, I should start from the beginning here. The lowest threshold on the monitor is 50 for zebra. Now this is, the middle gray bar is normally set around 40. So you're gonna have to overexpose it a little bit. So once you see the zebra inside this little area here, punch in. If you see the zebra, then that means you're still either under or overexposed. You just have to set it, like right now. So I have my waveform. Let's move this to the corner. So now my mid grays are set to 50. If you can see that little bar right here on the side. And if I punch in, all right, stop focusing. It looks pretty good, I would say. Put my highlights a little bit lower. And right there is about, I would say, once you see the zebra gone from this image, if I can show you guys. then your exposure from your whites and blacks are pretty spot on. And that's how I would set my exposure from that element if I'm doing an interview while using the monitor. And yeah, and that's pretty much it for the exposure side of it. And then, I'm sorry if there's anyone that has questions right now, because I'm over here, and I feel like I'm just going on about exposure and trying to like have the settings for log video. But I'm really curious to see if you guys have any questions or if I lost you along the way as far as setting up the Atomos monitor to your camera. Anyone? Yeah, I mean, I know you've been asking questions, so like feel free. Now is the actual open forum. Like if there's a time to do it, it would be now. Like I know you also have a Sony camera.
Yeah, but I don't have with mine. I guess it's the cable. It's not showing me what's going on the camera. It happens to me sometimes. I think it's the cable.
Okay. What kind of camera do you shoot with?
I'm the Sony S.
The Mark II or the Mark I?
The Mark.
The Mark II.
I've been having fun with it. You know, I'm still learning the process.
It could be, do you have your HDMI settings within your camera set up? So that way you can actually push the image out to the monitor? Have me repeat it?
About the locks, you think which one is preferred, S2 or S3?
Which
The S3 to me, you know, now watching you doing it in the process, maybe I can go up there and get better at it, but every time I just get the grainy and the loud noise. And then with the S2, it's more manageable, you know.
Yeah, so S2 is a lot more forgiving. Like as far as which log to use when shooting with the Sony, I prefer S-Log3. You get more dynamic range out of it. S-Log2 is more forgiving. You do have to be really spot on with your exposure when shooting with S-Log3 because, like, as you saw from that one clip, let me show you. When you're underexposed, why is it not showing? When your image isn't exposed, why is it not? All right, pass on that. When your exposure's off, you're definitely gonna have a lot more noise within the shadows, and it's not gonna be usable footage. It's gonna be washed, so it's extremely important. I would say using your S-Logs or using any log on your camera is really based upon what it is you're shooting, how much post-processing do you want to have, and what it is that you're creating. Like everything is, it's the workflow. Like everything it depends on what it is you're shooting. If it's anything that's like your own personal project, obviously I would always recommend shooting at the best quality possible. It's always important to just have your own work. Like if you're able to do it, then you should do it maxed out.
If you want to get 100 frames per second, obviously the Ninja doesn't do that.
I'm sorry?
The 100 frames, you know, the slow-mo 100 frames, 120.
It's 100, yeah, right.
The Ninja doesn't do it. You do it from the camera. When you need to do it,
This does actually record full 120 frames per second as well. It doesn't do it in 4K. It does it at 1080p.
and then you just slow it down in post.
Yes, you could do that. Like most of the times when you do record internally at a slower frame, at a higher frame rate, I should say, you won't be able to preview it in camera. You would have to do it in post. But there is a feature within the Sony a7R III that actually allows you to record at 120 frames per second and preview at 120 frames per second. No, it's like a new thing that they added. It's called the S&Q feature on the newer Sony cameras, which is called quick, slow and quick.
Then the HDR is better quality.
It's 1080p, so it's the same output resolution as that. There is no like loss of resolution. It really just all depends on what it is you're shooting for the moment in which you're shooting it. Yeah, and then you also have a Ninja Flame.
Yeah.
Okay.
They have it from there. It's great. Like I was telling you, I like it because I can judge what I'm looking at, you know, focus, the whole stuff besides all the goodies like video with a lot on it, or video whatever. But I do a lot of slow motion, like Asian farting.
Hmm? No, I'm just making sure that the thing is good.
So, that's what I was asking you, because I've been wanting to get me the other one, like I think the Shogun videos.
Right.
I do the 120 slow motion internal.
Internally. So yes, there is pros and cons to it. But for me, it's as far as slow motion goes, I would say it's if you want to step up to a bigger, the bigger like Atomos Shogun or anything like that, then they do have more features as you step up. But this, to me, specifically, the Flame is the perfect kind of setup for, I would say, my type of work. A lot of the things I do shoot is like straight commercial or event or like simple lookbooks, things like that, which doesn't necessarily require me to necessarily have all those. So this kind of fits more the needs of what I film on every day. Question? Anything? Anyone? What cameras do you guys shoot with? Like, are you guys all filmmakers here as well? Is that why you guys are here in the audience? You look like a filmmaker. Yeah. So, I guess.
Monitor works with the Nikon as well.
Yes, it works with all DSLRs, pretty much any camera system. It's pretty much set up and ready to go. But it is, I would say, it is targeted towards, really bringing your filmmaking up to another level. It's targeted more for a lot more stylized. Like, if you really care about your filmmaking, this is a tool, I think, that can really enhance that no matter what camera that you have. It's really beneficial. I want to show some more previews of some of the stuff I shot with the Atomos and kind of show you the starting point from recording from ProRes at 4K at S-Log to the actual post-processing of it, and how it kind of helps me dial it in from start to finish. I'm not sure why nothing's playing right now. Should I close this and then restart it? All right, I guess I have no choice. So we're just going to close this and restart it. Yeah, I feel like Apple has this thing where you try to show people stuff, and it intentionally doesn't want to work, no matter what it is. Open library. All right. Let's go here. Let's go to Atomos. All right, now we're back. So these are some more clips I shot during Fashion Week. This one I showed previously. This is just a slow-mo version, and that's before and after the color grading. So you can kind of see how really flat the image is when you do shoot S-Log. So it's easy to make, I would say, not make mistakes, but it's easy to get your color grading right, I should say. It just gives you like a nice flat canvas to kind of like just be able to color with. If like I said earlier, if there's anyone that started from photo and is moving into video, a lot of the fun in creating is, I feel like, the post-processing. And the post-processing is what really gives you and makes you stand out and really makes your image your own and not just anything else. This is also shot all on Atomos. And this was also during Fashion Week. It's like a small little clip. And this is just showcasing, like, from start to finish. It's nothing crazy, but just the amount of detail and how I was able to actually stylize it more to kind of fit the client's needs was really helpful. And it really helped me dial it in, because I would say normally on this particular shoot, I wouldn't even attempt to shoot S-Log because the light changes so much. There's so many variables, like in and out from backstage to the runway to running in and out of the tunnels. And having this kind of paired up, like it literally made my life so much easier, and it gave me a lot more confidence to be able to do that. And it also makes my client happy that I'm able to give more and give more of a stylized look that they may be looking for, as opposed to just image straight out the camera with like slight color grading. And
You can show the preview
correct.
better than.
So like, I mean, like this particular image, there's no sound or anything, but it's just how much like the color grading you can kind of get done from that image, and it literally just changes your image and makes it look a lot more cinematic. But that's just my personal style and my personal preference. If anyone, I would say, has anyone here shot in log format or anything like that?
Yeah, I basically practice. I'm not too, pro on it. I have a couple of tests. The 3 and that's like I see the 3, when I'm shooting slow 3, it's a little hard
Mhm.
to get they color gray like that. That's great.
Thanks. I mean, there's.
For example, like you said, when he's outside the sun and trying to shoot off on SO3 and then sun let you go from what?
They're asking,
Yeah.
what's the codec is better for Windows, DaVinci, ProRes, or Avid?
For Da Vinci?
Unless you use
They're asking what codec is better for Windows.
I'm listening.
For Windows PC, what codec is better for Windows PC, ProRes or Avid?
And he's color grading in Da Vinci? Was that the question? Oh, we have a question coming online. Hold on.
It's asking what codec would you recommend for PC?
Which codec would I recommend for a Windows PC?
Yeah, ProRes or Avid DMX.
Um,
Do you use Premiere or Final Cut?
I would say it's really based upon whether or not you're using Premiere or Final Cut. If you're using Final Cut, I would go Apple ProRes, like 422. And then if you're using Premiere, I would go Avid. It just streamlines everything in post-processing, like to have the files already rendered and coded to go right into post. It really does save yourself a lot of time. So to that question, I would definitely say it all really depends on what you're editing with.
What do you think of the Atomos Ronin?
The Atomos Ronin.
Yeah.
To be honest, I haven't had my hands on it to give a full honest opinion. But we could ask an expert, perhaps, to fill us in. The Atomos Ronin. Roger, you care to share on this Atomos Ronin?
It's not going to be Mike.
He's not going to be Mike, but you can just
what was the
use me as your vessel and I'll channel it.
Yeah.
We got a question about the Atomos Ronin.
Ronin. Okay. What about?
That's what he thinks.
Like my thoughts. I haven't had enough hands-on experience to truly.
So the Ronin is an actual discontinued item. It was designed for studio type products that required rack mounting. So it
Sounds
also
technical.
can do no, that means you just put it into a rack.
It's discontinued. So for that question, it's discontinued. I'm sure you can find some information on Atomos website.
Yeah, no, it's a discontinued.
It's a discontinued model. Yeah. You got anyone else there on there? Anyone tweeting away?
You can help me later, I guess, with the HDMI.
Yeah, I'll be happy to show you like a little hands-on to kind of give you a rundown of anything that you might be like bumping into. I know I initially, when I had the A7R3, we had a little bit of an issue connecting the HDMI to have the format, and it was literally it was in the settings. Totally. So I figure one of the things I could show you that's might be a little bit helpful is maybe my post-processing and how I'm able to kind of get this out there in the way, and how I color grade and taking it from start to finish, straight from here, and putting it directly into my hard drive.
Version of Final Cut?
Yes, this is
Right
it. literally updated last night, if that's what you're asking. It added
You just updated.
well, I think it just came out like a day ago. To be honest, Final Cut finally stepped up their color grading
Amen,
just
right?
in time for me to actually do this, which was kind of great. One of the things, I mean, I don't want to talk about Apple stuff right now, but one of the things I think that does help is their coloring now. They've added a lot more features here. So they actually have a color wheel, which they did not have before. And the color wheel just literally, I actually used it to color grade this film. So I'm gonna turn it on. Right. We're gonna just click these on. We're gonna take this off and take this off. So here I have my color wheel, and I'll pull up my histogram, and you can see that my contrast is a little high. Highlights could be a little bit lower, but this is something that we can kind of correct. So normally I start with my highlights, I'll pull them down a little bit, start from my shadows, and try to bring my contrast down to about the bottom, at least some of the image is touching it. And then my midtones, I'd like to have it primarily between like 40 to 50, ideally 40. And once you start doing that, you can kind of start seeing the image really start to come together. And then from there, like you start locking in the exposure, making sure everything's good. So before you actually drop your LUT and before you actually start color grading, you want to make sure your white balance, you want to make sure your tints, the colors are all good. And by doing that, like you can use your vector scope. And as you can see, colors are not really that bad. Like you want to keep them as even as possible, spread out through the frame. That's something you can adjust by using the tint and the temperature. So as you can see, you can do a slight movement. Maybe I want to warm it up or cool it down to bring it a little bit more centered. Just to kind of like dial it in and get that perfect exposure, perfect white balance, have like a nice clean canvas before you start digging in. It's really stylizing. And obviously you can play with the hues, things like that, but that's for a whole nother thing. So now that I got pretty happy for the most part with the way this is exposed, we'll go back to, I'm sorry?
The white's the top one?
Yeah.
At like 75, is that where you want it ideally?
For this particular shot, for this particular shot, yes, because I'll show you, because as the frame starts to move, it's gonna jump and change. So the highlights, I'd like to keep them low because when I drop the LUT in, it's gonna pretty much drop the colors in. So I'll show you how from here, I'll go to my LUT, we'll go to the thing, we'll go to general, and you can go pick your LUT. So they have pre-installed LUTs in Cine here. Now when you drop it in, it's going to probably blow it out a little bit more than you would like, as you can see. So now you see your highlights start to jump and everything like that. So now you can go back to your color wheel and just kind of adjust from there. Like maybe bring these highlights down, they're a little too high, bring the contrast down. It's about 0, and then your midtones you want to bring down a little bit. But even then, you can kind of see it has like this different kind of tone and different kind of coloration, which is fine. I use a custom LUT personally for my S-Log, which is why I got those tones the way I did. I personally use custom LUTs for the most part. I have my S-Log LUTs and everything like that set, and then I kind of fine-tune them for my own personal needs. But this is how I would do it, and then this is the LUT that I created. Remove this color wheel and put there, and then at the end of it, that's kind of the image that I was hoping to get from it. You know, from the original to here, it's quite drastic, I would say. You know, like that's like a good example of where it was to where it can be. And this is like, I totally commend the monitor itself for allowing me to be able to capture this. So I feel like otherwise, I would probably be limited, and I probably wouldn't be able to expose it the way I would want without me having to use multiple like ND filters or multiple other tools. This is as simple as it gets, and it just kind of streamlines everything for me. And that's kind of like my color, the whole setup from start to finish. And so those are some of the points to key in on. And then, let me turn this off. Okay. Now, ideally, have any of you guys actually had your hands and tried one of these out of curiosity? I'd really love to kind of get you guys kind of hands-on, if that's possible. Yeah, we'll do that after. Okay. And then, yeah.
They're asking between the V-Log and GH5 and the Atomos log, what's the difference in quality and flexibility?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The difference between Atomos log and V-Log and the GH5.
To the GH5 and the V-Log. I don't necessarily shoot with that particular camera, but I do know about the V-Log and how it just came out. V-Log for the GX5 has 2 more stops of dynamic range internal, but it's still compressed, and there's still a lot of, how do I say, the proper term for just noise, not noise, but it's kind of like lost it here, my train of thought. But artifacts, I would say a lot of like compressed artifacts as far as, you know, the video file itself being kind of limited. But if you have V-Log and you actually record out into the actual monitor, you're not going to get 402 bit color. You're going to get 422 bit color rate from the Atomos monitor. And that's if you're shooting with the GX5 on the V-Log. And personally, if you're going to start shooting at those logs at that point on certain cameras, there's really no point in doing that, in my personal opinion, if you're not going to maximize what it actually can do. If you're going to shoot log and you're going to just shoot internally compressed images, you're not going to maximize what you're getting out of the camera. You're not going to get the color range. You're not going to get the dynamic range. You're literally getting a compressed file that you're going to try to push to the limits. Yeah, you're not going to be able to push it as much. You're going to be limited to it. You may even get a lot more noise. But when you record externally, it's literally you're getting the files straight out the camera. Like what the camera's putting out, this is actually recording. The camera itself is limited by its own processor. So though the camera has all these amazing features, it's still limited by its own technology. Like you're going to take full advantage of this Sony sensor when you pair it, or any camera when you pair it with an external recording device.
You got what's an alternative for the Ronin if they're trying to do closed circuit coverage? Just repeat that.
I'm sorry, what was the question? Can you say that one more time?
A replacement for the Ronin.
Replacement for the Ronin would be the Shogun Studio.
And what lens do you got on there?
This is a 24-70 Sony G Master, and it's one of my favorite lenses to actually film with. It's got great depth of field, and it's really versatile, especially if you're like running and gunning, which is primarily the kind of filming I do. It's very doc style, very guerrilla. I'm sorry? 2.8.
I got the other one, the one that is 4.
I mean, the cameras are getting better. Cameras are getting better. Low light sensitivity is getting a lot better.
You got me pumped with that situation about the ride where I just know slow motion, like
Mhm.
that. And I've been using the H4, the quality.
I hear you.
I wanted to ask you if this option where I can get that whole good 30 frames per second using the app. You know, that's why I asked earlier if I go to regular and then slow it in, right?
Yeah, so this
I don't know if
doesn't.
I'm asking the right question.
So this, so your question was, can you record 120 frames externally with the Flame? No. Yes.
Not with the Sony.
Not with the Sony, I should say, because I tried and I couldn't do it with the Sony.
Your camera has to be capable of doing it. So if it can't output it, then
All right.
you'll be able to see it.
All right. So if your camera is capable of outputting it, then you can record it directly onto it. So right. So this could do everything your camera will actually allow it to do. So whatever your camera is able to output, this can receive, no matter what it is. So it's pretty much across the board. Another really cool feature, actually, that I really want to share about this, and I played with it a little, and I wish I had more time to just shoot all over the city, is that they have a time-lapse mode, which to me is, it's drastically helpful. That's like a terrible way to put it, but it's really helpful in a way where it helps your post-production. So if I'm doing a car shoot, a lot of times I'll need a time lapse. I'll need something like that to be able to record a time lapse through here. Here, let me set this up. Yeah, and it's not camera dependent, which is unbelievably helpful. Let me turn this on.
Another thing I can add for the monitor is that it records, depends on what the drive that you're using. You can record longer time. Like if you do an interview.
Of course.
Or show.
I mean, exactly. So there we go. So most mirrorless cameras, DSLR cameras, are limited to 30 minutes recording times. This kind of bypasses all that. So all the limitations your camera actually has, this just steps right over it and allows you to kind of push it even further.
But I'm confused because you're saying that pushes the limits, but then you're just saying that if only if your camera can do a certain thing, it won't. Like you were just talking about the frame rate, like you can't go to 120 unless the camera does it, right? That's what you said.
Right.
So then that confused my whole
All right.
brain because
So-
then it's like, so then what are the limits that the camera has control over as opposed to the monitor? You know what I mean? Because like it has control over the frame, but it doesn't, I guess, on other stuff like maybe the ISO or I'm not quite sure.
So the monitor, so the monitor itself can receive all the information that your camera can do. So it's capable of doing. So if your camera can shoot at 120 frames per second and shoot it out to the point where this can receive it at 120 frames per second, this will do that. If my camera doesn't have those features, I'm not going to be able to maximize and utilize that. So what this does do is what limits your camera does have as far as the compression when you film internally. This allows it.
Could not compress.
Well, not necessarily compressed, but it also allows it to receive the full amount of information that the camera is pushing out. So the camera can actually send out, bigger files, yeah.
Basically helping with the quality, right?
Ultimately, it's quality. Yeah, because internally it records at 420 color space.
You got the 420.
Externally, since there's no processing happening, plus not Sony's XVAC.
Right.
Graduation.
So it basically just gives you more like
Better
dynamic
colors.
range. Like that's basically
More dynamic range, better colors.
Better
So
viewfinder.
if you find it for sure and like the way that like the technical aspect behind the camera of us being capable of seeing things, I understand. But and then the noise, because the video that you showed at first at Fashion Week where it was like super noisy and you said that you did that without it, right?
I did it without the monitor, correct.
You got to shoot
Now
with
if
the
you
monitor
did it,
after?
Yeah, I did.
why? I'm confused because I'm very technical in my brain.
Live stream is just going to get all these questions. And then
Okay. Okay.
you want to just like kind of go around. We'll do a wrap up and do the questions after, okay? Because you're live streaming right now.
I have no idea what you
So we're live streaming.
Shut first, we're live streaming, and then you can do the Q&A.
Yeah, we'll do. I'll answer that question, like I guess once we're wrapping up with this. So to go all the way back to where we were, this is the time lapse feature on the monitor, which I really find.
That's time code.
Oh, there we go. It's on. Perfect. It really just allows you to kind of set.
You're on time code.
I'm on time code. HDMI. Oh, my bad. Hold on.
So go back in time lapse.
There we go. So here I'm back on time lapse. We have capture. So we can kind of set it where the camera will receive a frame from every 1 second clip, every 10 to 15 to 20 seconds, whatever you decide to kind of put in there. You can put an odd number for all I care. So you can pretty much set it. It has a. It has like a built-in, pretty much like what you would use for a photography camera, which is an intervalometer. This pretty much has the same exact setup, but it's a lot easier to use, and it's not nearly as confusing. So you can set it for capture 1 second every, let's say, 2 minutes for 5 hours. All right, let's see. Frames. 5, 2. What? I just pressed 2. There we go. What? All right, let's do every 1 minute because clearly my fingers are greasy. And once you have that set, you pretty much can start, yeah. And then you can start your time lapse and it'll just start recording. I should just have one set to roll and just capture everyone in the audience. We'll see how that kind of. Yep.
Perfect time for this question I have.
What's that?
Other option for the batteries, like a thinner battery. That's one of my only things that is heavy.
We're gonna. I guess we could start the Q&A in a couple of minutes because I know you have a lot of questions. I still want to answer yours as well. Yeah, it's all good. All right. So we're gonna put it and we're gonna start it. All right. And I'm just gonna run this time lapse and we can like view it after. And when it's set. And we're good to go. All right. All right, I guess we might as well start. I don't know if there's much else as far as a highlight as of right now. Sorry? All right, well, I guess we're gonna sign out of the live stream right now. So for those of you who did tune in, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, I guess, feel free. Kevin Ornelas, cinematographer, filmmaker, photographer. You can follow me on Instagram at kevin.ornelas, that's Ornelas on Instagram, and the same as Twitter, Vimeo, and YouTube. So thanks for tuning in.